All right, it's another edition of the Penn State Blitz here on PennLive. Greg, where you been? I feel like we haven't talked about Penn State football this year.
Yeah, it's been quite some time.
It's been too long. Spring practice started.
Yep.
A lot to talk about, a lot of storylines. For you, as we're talking about James Franklin in year 5, I mean, I could remember when he was in year 3 and it was a little bit sketchy whether he would get to year 5, but
right.
he's gotten here. What are you looking for in spring? I think there's a couple of very interesting storylines. What's got your attention?
Yeah, there are. There's a few things that jump out right away, Bob. The first one being the number of positions they have to fill. So you mentioned 3 years ago, there was a lot going on at that point too. Even as recently as 2 years ago, there was a lot of position things they had to figure out. They did so successfully. It's why they won the Big Ten title in 2016 and had another 11-win season and won the Fiesta Bowl a year ago. If we know anything about this staff, Bob, it's that they know how to find guys and develop them to fill holes. But they got some new names. David Corley, the receivers coach, Jaywan Sider, the running backs coach. Obviously, Ricky Rahne is now leading things on the offensive side as well. Phil Galliano is doing the same with the special teams for the first time. So I think this is an interesting, maybe the most interesting spring of James Franklin's tenure because of all the newness. You lose some key pieces, and you put it all together, and you have a very potential packed Penn State football team. It just has a lot of things to figure out between now and September. So I think that's what's jumped out at me so far.
Okay, so Ricky Rahne replacing Joe Moorhead.
Yeah.
Got to put his stamp on the offense. Do you think it's going to change?
I don't think you're going to see too much different. No. I think that when you look at what they did in the Fiesta Bowl, obviously they didn't have time to fiddle with too many things between the time Joe Moorhead left, the time Ricky Rahne took over, and obviously you're not going to change much of what you did from a previously 10-win season before winning in the Fiesta Bowl. So will it look a little bit different? Yeah, and I think part of that's because of what we've talked about before. Teams, I don't think, at least not at the beginning of the year, are not going to attack Penn State defensively the way they attacked Penn State last year with Saquon Barkley in the backfield. I don't know if that means more pressure on Trace McSorley. I don't know if teams play them more straight up. And the other thing that lingers out there too, Bob, as it relates to Ricky Rahne and the offense is what happens with Commie Stevens. That's the hot button topic of the spring right now. Yes, if you've been following along, he was not at the open practice last week. And at this point in time, the question again will keep coming up. Is he going to transfer? Is he not going to transfer? And obviously, if he does, that will change and impact the way Penn State goes at things on offense as well.
Okay, so let's pro-con it real quick with Tommy because, I mean, that's all I get asked about. Is Tommy going to go? Is he going to stay? People have a very strong opinion about him, and that the fact there's a perception out there that he could start on almost any team in the Big Ten. I don't know that that's accurate.
Right.
I don't think he's ever going to push Trace McSorley for the starting job, but he's a guy that can impact the game as a runner, as a receiver, and as a passer. And he did in a very limited role last year, but that doesn't mean he's ever going to play quarterback at Penn State while Trace is here.
Right.
But if he does transfer, so we're assuming he'll graduate in the spring, he would be eligible to transfer to a major college right away. If he did, like, really, where could he go, do you think?
Well, that's the question, because I think if you're Tommy Stevens and his family and whoever else is helping him make this decision, if you're him, you have to look at it as, okay, I have to find somewhere I'm more or less guaranteed the starting job, because if not, then he might find himself back in this quote-unquote lion role, you know, the position he's at with Penn State's depth chart, where he's a quarterback, running back, receiver, de facto decoy, you know, whatever Joe Moorhead asked him to do, and then Ricky Rahne in the bowl game. And then if he doesn't win a job at another school, does that school use him the same way? Or is it just relegated to backup quarterback duty? So where could he go? I think we'll know more after spring practice is done across the board. Why? Because there'll be schools where kids transfer and they move around, and it's almost like a big game of connect the dots for any quarterback or any position player, period, that wants to move, because Bob, at this point, you have to try and weigh the odds and figure out, okay, am I likely to start at School A or School B in 2018, or do I stay here, do I wait, and then Trace McSorley obviously moves on after this season.
Okay, real quick, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you assess him leaving or staying? The possibility of him leaving on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say?
I mean, I think it has to be, whatever the above average range is, 8 maybe, I think is probably up there at this point in time. I just look at it and you just wonder, I mean, he's said all the right things. He's done all the right things. I can't imagine there's a better teammate and a kid that's been in a better, and it's not a favorable spot as maybe he'd want to be in. But he's done everything and said everything the right way. But you sometimes get the impression that he believes in himself as a starting quarterback, not as starting this, that, or the other thing. So if that's the case, he's going to have to go somewhere else if he wants to play this year.
All right, it's the Penn State Blitz here on PennLive. You guys need to subscribe to the Penn State channel, YouTube/AllPennState.
Yep.
A lot of great stuff. That's quarter number one. Quarter number two, let's talk about some of the positions that are really interesting in spring for Penn State.
Yeah.
You look at the defensive side of the ball, I think they're replacing 8 starters.
Right.
Is there a critical area in your mind that they need to fill? James Franklin talked about it at his introductory spring press conference about a couple needs.
Yeah.
But how do you see it as far as critical areas?
Yeah, I want to get into the safeties eventually, but I think middle linebacker is the one that's really that strikes me the most. And there's a few reasons for that, Bob. You look at the fact that they put Micah Parsons there, and what does that mean? Does that mean that and James Franklin has said they know what he can do at defensive end. What does that mean for the future? Can he play middle linebacker? The question is, do they just want to try him there, or do they feel so badly about their other options that they think it might be him or bust at that position? And can a freshman come in and be the quarterback of the defense like a Jason Cabinda was in the past? It's a really interesting and delicate situation, I think.
Elite athlete.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's not him, you're really talking about Jake Cooper or Jan Johnson.
Yep.
I think if he has a good spring, I think they will absolutely fast track him to play right away. They haven't had many recruits like him.
Right.
And I'll also be curious, Greg, to see if he ends up at middle linebacker later in his career. I think he'll move.
Yeah.
He could literally play 5 or 6 positions,
right,
offense or defense. Fascinating. Also, you talked about safety.
Yeah.
I think Nick Scott, the way that James Franklin always kind of tips his hand a little bit when he talks about players he really likes. Nick Scott, I think, is probably going to start at safety. Who's the other guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'll say about Nick Scott, doesn't he fit that Marcus Allen role perfectly?
Yeah.
Not playing a ton of pass coverage, but just in the box, hitting guys, and playing near the line of scrimmage. I think that role fits him perfectly. The other one, I mean, I think it comes down to 2 guys, Lamont Wade or Jonathan Sutherland. I just don't see – I don't know if you move Lamont Wade there to sit him, which makes me think he has the inside track. But, of course, there's some other guys, Aaron Monroe, Johnny Patrician, guys that have been around for a long time, Garrett Taylor. They're all going to push for a spot in the secondary. But if you had to handicap it now, you would have to think Wade or the redshirt freshman Sutherland would be the leaders in the clubhouse for that job. Of course, there's a lot of time between now and the start of the season when Appalachian State comes to town in September.
What I like about Lamont Wade is he's a physical player. You want that presence at safety. And also he can slide to slot corner in the nickel because they're going to be in the nickel the majority of their staff. So I think he's definitely a guy to watch in spring. Let's talk about a parade.
Yes.
Let's talk about Saquon Barkley. You had the pleasure of going to my own backyard where I grew up, Coplay, Pennsylvania. Saquon Barkley had a parade in his hometown. I know that talking to you were there, you really enjoyed it. Can you just talk to the fans a little about what that experience was like?
It was. I mean, it was quite a day in Copley. They had a really nice setup for him. And it was clear, too, that sometimes you see these parades and events, Bob, and guys come back and feel almost obligated to do it. There was no obligation here on either side's part. There was just desire to get together and share memories and share, moments that, again, this kid grew up a little bit in Brooklyn, but for the most part, Copley and the Whitehall School District and high school and athletic program is part of the reason that he went to Penn State and started there, and then obviously moved on to the NFL at this point. So to me, it was a really nice day. It was packed. I mean, there was over 1,000 people there. I'm certain of that. They never gave an official number, but there was a nice crowd on hand, and I think that everyone really enjoyed themselves. And Barkley said he's going to not be a stranger around town. Obviously, depending on where he gets drafted, he won't be able to get back much, but there's a clear connection, and it was on display.
Before we talk about his replacement, a couple things happened with relating to the draft and Saquon Barkley. The Jets moved up to number 3, and the Giants, who sit at number 2, traded a pass rusher, Jason Pierre-Paul, to the Tampa Bay Bucks. I think that might influence maybe where Saquon goes.
Yeah, so he was, and the other thing, too, is just over the weekend, he was so complimentary of Eli Manning and Odell Beckham, and now, of course, as we tape this in the middle of March, Odell Beckham is maybe on the trade block, maybe not. You don't know what's going on there. But the Giants, Dave Gettleman, the new GM, has a history of doing pass rushers, so Bradley Chubb is certainly in play there. I don't think Saquon has any idea where he's going.
No.
I honestly don't. I mean, when you look at the draft, he makes sense at a number of different spots. There's other guys that also make sense for those first 6 teams, so it will be interesting to see how it all plays out.
I would say that he was a top 5 pick maybe a month ago, but with these moves, the Jets don't trade up to 3 to take Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
And with the Giants now in the market for a pass rusher in Bradley Chubb, I mean, there's a very real possibility he could slide out of the top 5.
Yeah.
But we'll just see. It's worth pointing out, though, the last 2 years, a running back's gone at number 4.
Right.
Ezekiel Elliott and also the kid from LSU, Fournette.
Yep.
So we'll see. One more thing to wrap up with here on the Penn State Blitz. It's who is going to replace Saquon Barkley. A lot of people think it's Miles Sanders, but there's a guy coming in August that can play a little bit, Slade, Ricky Slade. Do you think Ricky Slade can play this year?
I do. I absolutely do. I think that when you look at what Miles Sanders is capable of, he's had moments where he's flashed, and he's had moments where maybe the 4-star, highly rated recruit hasn't necessarily shown through. We've talked in the past about fumbles being an issue. He seems to have put that behind him. But I think one thing Ricky Rahne and Jaywan Slater, the running backs coach, have to figure out is, are they going to ride one guy, or are they going to mix and match? To me, they're probably a little bit more likely to mix and match.
Yeah.
You look at the depth chart, obviously Mark Allen and Jonathan Thomas have been there a long time. It's hard to see them getting anything more than late in game carries and things like that. But Journey Brown's an exciting name for a lot of reasons, speed chief among them. You look at what Slade did in high school, too. I think you see a very heavy dose of Sanders and Slade this year, a little bit of Journey Brown mixed in, and then some from those other guys as well.
I just remember in 2015, everyone just assumed Akeel Lynch was going to be Penn State's next really good back, 1,000-yard runner. Saquon Barkley shows up in August, just turns some heads in practice. By week 2, he is established as a star.
Right.
I know Ricky Slade is not built like Saquon Barkley. He's a little bit undersized, but he's an explosive player, and I do think James Franklin has shown that the best players will play, like regardless of what class they are. I'm really interested to see what Ricky Slade could do on the practice field in August.
No question about it. I think that Penn State is obviously a big challenge to replace Saquon Barkley, and I agree with James Franklin that it's going to be a offense-wide effort, not a running back-only effort. But they have a lot to figure out, no question about that.
All right, before we wrap it up, do we have any questions or comments, any pressing things they want to ask you about?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things.
The parade, maybe?
Yeah, no, Jennifer Evans loved the parade. She went. Chris is checking in from Richmond. And then Kevin is appreciative of our matching shirts colors, so that's
We
good.
always try and coordinate.
We do, yeah, Kevin, we do try that every week.
Even Salim is wearing black.
That's right, yeah.
Our guy Salim's wearing black. He's off camera, but yeah, we do coordinate here at the Penn State Blitz.
That's right. Kevin also is curious about the kicking game, and he's a little bit concerned, and I think rightly so, about, okay, so Blake Gilligan, what if he's the best bet for kicking and punting, and how could that impact his punting?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy that, Bob, let's be honest, when Penn State struggled offensively under Joe Moorhead, and it wasn't often, this guy usually came and saved the day, and I think a lot of that has to do not only with the fact that he's very good, but also because he only had one job, and that was punting when he had to go out and do it.
Yeah, two things to note about that. James Franklin has already on record saying he wants Blake to focus just on punting. Yep. I think he would change his tune if the kickers are not consistent. Also, 2011, I believe, Anthony Farah was a punter, place kicker at Penn State. I do think he's their best option, but James sounds determined to split up those duties. He's also worried about just having a guy that can kick off.
Right, yeah. So submit your questions if you have any more. I think one thing to point out about that is that Jake Pinniger comes in June, the 3-star kicker recruit. It's hard to really get too much of a read on the kicker rankings. That's mostly because guys will go to one camp or the other camp and get rated only by that camp, and it gets a little bit in the mud. So he's a guy that will participate. And then, Bob, they've made a big focus on bringing in walk-on specialists. I think there's 3 or 4 coming along in this class as well. They won't be hurting for numbers competition-wise. They could be hurting for the top-of-the-line guy that they need. We'll have to wait and see on that. I will say this, too. Carson Landis is on campus. James Franklin made pretty clear that he has a strong leg. He has consistency issues. I think over the last few years, that's the one thing we've heard the most about when it comes to specialists, particularly the kickers, is just consistency being an issue.
All right, so we have a Penn State media availability coming up with James Franklin later in the week. Stay tuned to PennLive and the Penn State Blitz. We're going to have some more stuff later. And let's just always keep in mind, I think the Commie Stevens thing is a real possibility.
Yeah.
But he's got some thinking to do. He is on schedule, Greg, to graduate. So he is eligible to transfer. And I think that's the one thing, the one storyline that the fan base is not going to let go of. And we'll see what Commie Stevens wants to do.